fatter. You wouldn't really recognize him as the same guy that I knew. I mean, everyone gets a little older, a little fatter, but it was significant. His face was like really puffy and like a little bit, I wouldn't say disfigured, but you can tell he was not in good health. And he told me that he keeps talking about how like Palomar Hospital almost killed him. He's had a pacemaker put in. I don't know what had happened. I forget what had happened. And he had COPD.
Still with me, litigation trial attorney Rich Schoenstein. All right, Rich, if you look at what viewers are saying, there are a lot of comments about the demeanor of the defendant Janks on the stand and that they don't really care for her. They don't find her credible. Tell me, first of all, let's talk about demeanor and then actual testimony. Your takeaways of her demeanor.
I can understand why people are making those comments. She seems, I would say two things. One, she seems a little bit casual about how she's describing the whole thing. Now, that's tough to say because this testimony like this always happens so far after the facts that the way people react to it changes. But she's a little casual. She's also just a little bit gratuitous in the way she's describing him. You know, sleazy, there's ickiness, he drank too much at her house, older, fatter. I don't think she's doing herself any favors by describing him so negatively.
Well, that's an interesting point. And one of the things that, you know, is listening to the questions, the form of the question, trial skills, objection leading, sustain. And the attorney even said, well, except for your kind of own ickiness, and asked the question, and the leading objection was sustained. So I also struggle sometimes, Rich, with the form of the questions being asked and the care with which attorneys need to take to ask questions in a way that makes the story compelling. So that pivots me to her actual testimony. Tell us what you think of what she's saying and how she's saying it in terms of whether or not the jury is listening and believing her version of events.
Well, I always want to hear all the way to the end until I make a final determination, but I'm not loving this part of her testimony. And I think you're right, Judge. It's not helped by the way the questions are being asked. You know, people don't always understand direct testimony, I think, is actually harder than cross-examination because you can't ask leading questions. You can't just push the witness where you want to go. You have to set the witness up to tell a story. And this seems like maybe a lot of background. As I said, some negative comments about the victim that I'm not sure are helping. So I'm struggling with it so far. Also, it doesn't totally fit with the narrative, and I'm interested to see where she goes about what happens when she finds the pictures on his computer.
Yes, me too, and it's who, what, when, where, how, describe, explain. Those are the forms of questions you're supposed to ask when you are on direct examination, to your point. Stay with us, Rich. I always enjoy having you. And the prosecution says medication prescribed to Jade Janks showed up in Merriman's system. We're going to hear Janks' reasoning for this when we return here on Court TV Live.
You know, my daughter's got power of attorney, and so I'd call in to check on my dad.
Okay, so do you know what he was being treated for there at Scripps?
Yeah, they actually said they were treating him. They said they'd look at all the injuries, but they were treating him for Xanax and alcohol withdrawal.
Still with me, litigation trial attorney Rich Schoenstein. All right, Rich, we know by all accounts that, yes, he had medical issues, the victim in this case, use of drugs, use of alcohol, but is that an effective defense?
It could be an effective defense. I mean, I understand where they're going with this, that's what caused, he had his own overdose or something like that. But I think she has a real problem here in her testimony because she says he had heart problems, he had sleeping problems, he had anxiety, he had drinking problems. So what did I do? I gave him some of my medication and said, here, try this. I mean, that doesn't seem careful That seems sort of crazy. And just at bottom, it's a very weird relationship that the two of those have after her mother has been divorced from this individual. So I don't see that story helping her so far.
Would you have advised her to testify or not if you were representing her?
Well, so here are the two things that you have to think about, right? Number one, do I really need her to testify? Meaning, is there enough evidence already out there that she's going to get convicted if she doesn't testify? So I have to make that determination. And then secondly, how do I think she's going to do on the stand? And I would assume her attorneys practiced with her. I certainly do with my clients to see how they're going to fare, to see how they're going to survive under cross-examination. And I would weigh all of that. So from what I'm seeing right now, I'm not so sure, but I don't like to second guess defense counsel who knows a lot better both the evidence that's out there and the strengths and weaknesses of their client.
All right, fair enough, Rich, and that's why you're a good trial attorney. Thank you so much for joining us today and all of your expertise.